I call the Urbana Historic Preservation Commission to order. Could we have roll call, please?
David Hayes,
Here.
Alice Novak,
Here.
Laura O'Donnell,
Here.
and Trent Shepard.
Here.
Okay, we have a quorum. Next item is approval of previous minutes. Did we get minutes from,
Minutes have not been put together for last month's meeting.
okay. All right, we'll look for minutes at our next meeting then. No audience participation, I see. Staff report. I skipped a bunch of things that weren't listed. So staff report, Marcus, take it away.
Okay. It's a bit hefty of one. Under public input and items of interest, I'm also putting down here historic preservation inquiries that we've gotten. You have probably seen that my emails to you regarding 312 West Green Street. Sylvia Sullivan there, who runs Sylvia's Irish Inn, had contacted the city trying to get some guidance about how to deal with the half-round historic gutters on her property. She said that she'd had problems finding somebody to replace them. Some on the non-frontage sides of the house are leaking and they need to be replaced so that they don't damage the house. I spoke with Alice about it to get, some guidance and ideas from her. That led to a couple of company names. I contacted them and confirmed they both do half-round gutters, so now it would be more of an issue of time and money rather than being able to actually find somebody to do the historic type of work. So I passed that on to Sylvia. If anybody else has any other recommendations, I know that it would be preferable that we, that Sylvia keep the historic character of what's on there now. I did kind of skim through our database of certificates of appropriateness, and I think we might have issued a certificate of appropriateness for a non-half-round gutter in years past. But we'll see what Sylvia comes back with, if she's able to find somebody. If she is, then we don't need to worry about it. 202 North Broadway Avenue, U.S. Post Office and, IMC accessibility ramp. Miriam Larson came to us and said, hi, we want to do this accessibility ramp project that goes down into the basement.
Who is she?
She's the executive director of the Independent Media Center. And it was interesting that at around the time that she had come, we had dealt with another issue about the IMC, and it came to my attention that there are deed restrictions on the property where IMC took possession of the property over from the U.S. Postal Service, saying any external changes need to be reviewed by SHPO except for certain kinds. The issue was painting a mural on the side of the building. So because that had been brought to our attention, I started putting together a packet, and it took several months to put together a packet of photographs and maps, sent that off to SHPO first week of August, and they'll be reviewing it. I don't think there will be any issues with it, but it was a new thing. I hadn't dealt with SHPO before. Any questions or comments about that? Oh, okay. It'll be replacing the accessibility ramp that's there on the north side of the building that goes down into the basement, and it will include a switchback ramp as well as replacing the stairs. So it'll take up a bit more of a footprint, but it'll be usable by wheelchairs and other folks with mobility issues as a ramp. Dr. Ellis subdivision, haven't heard it back from them yet, so I'll poke them. Yes.
Maybe you or Alice. Neighborhood Conservation District, we don't have any.
Right.
And we have a provision for them, do we?
Yes. As I understand,
And how
staff
do they
took quite a bit of
How do they work
time.
and what do they do?
It's less focused, but can still be focused on architecture and focuses maybe more on cultural. It works more with a group of concerned residents who want to set up a district. If you're familiar with the one that tried to get set up in Champaign around Clark Park,
I
it's
remember
that exact same sort of thing. A group of
Alright.
citizens get together and they work with staff to come up with a set of design guidelines. And those design guidelines are then what proposed projects might be
So
reviewed
it's
against.
mostly about design guidelines.
Well,
For new construction or for
alterations
remodeling?
as well. It all depends on what that set of guidelines focuses on.
Okay,
This group is less concerned about, acknowledging architecture and more about acknowledging the fact that this was the first African-American subdivision in the city. So they might not be concerned as much about design guidelines. The main reason that we considered it rather than a historic district was because it might not elicit as much oversight from SHPO when alterations to historic homes came up.
okay.
And so we might be talking a little bit more about that later on today when we talk about the programmatic agreement. But when I did ask SHPO, hey, we understand that a historic district triggers an environmental review at SHPO when federal funds and other similar projects take place there. Is that the same for other sorts of districts like this neighborhood conservation district? And they said no. So if there's a way to acknowledge the thing that the people want to acknowledge without the burden of historic and environmental reviews, maybe that's the better way to go. We were also concerned about putting obstacles in the way of people who, might need to replace their roof or have emergency repairs come up without having to go through a certificate of appropriateness for every single project. So, maybe with staff, we would come up with a review slate of projects that was maybe less picky, like window replacement might not receive as
So you
much
can kind
concern.
of write your own menu?
Yes, yes.
Okay.
And again, it'll be like, we've never done one before, so it'll be a
Yeah.
learning experience for everybody.
Okay.
Is it fair to say that it's more of a community and open space concern than I mean, which can include architecture,
Yes.
but it includes more like streetscapes, parkscapes, spaces that are culturally significant, shared
Right.
spaces, and viewable private.
I think I could see it characterized as that. Next item, Grants Management Division Programmatic Agreement with Illinois State Historic Preservation Office. I'll just briefly gloss over this because we're going to talk about it in the study session more. Braden Belcher is here from the Grants Management Division. The two divisions are working together on this agreement that would allow city staff to complete reviews rather than them having to be done down at SHPO, which could speed along repair projects and other community development block grant funded projects or similar home funded projects. I will leave all the letters to Braden to explain. And there's 3 items that were in the packet in the staff report that are associated with that. HPC member update, Renee Pollock did tender her resignation yesterday, effective immediately, and staff appreciate her willingness to serve on the commission and wish her well, which does open up another vacancy, so tell your friends and neighbors. In reviewing the historic preservation ordinance, there is language in there about members of the commission recommending people to the mayor. I think that's the HPC chairs, one of their responsibilities or powers and duties. So don't be a wallflower about sending people our way. Item about building permit fee waivers. So there's been back and forth over the years about if you're doing a building project on a historic landmark or a property in a historic district, the building permit fees get waived. There was even language in one of our brochures about that at one time. We found some memos. At this time, though, formally, there is no language codified in the city's schedule of fees that waives building permits fees for historic properties. So staff are working on that. We'll be working on that with the finance department and with the building safety division. It isn't like we get those coming up every day that we need to worry about it. But I would like to get out in front of it so that we can offer that as the only benefit other than the cool plaque
Yeah.
that people get. But I just wanted to get that on record as right now they're not being waived. Our expectation is that they will be waived in the future for single and two-family homes and commercial properties and multifamily properties will pay the building permit fees because those are commercial properties versus, you know, resident properties. Certified local government assessment and reporting, John Presley, who's the new program coordinator. We've scheduled a quadrennial 4-year review with staff. That'll be happening or starting next week. I'll be talking with him on the phone as well. He will be requiring an annual report in December. It's been a while since we've done one. There's a nice new fillable PDF form that'll make things a lot easier. However, you'll see in bold that this review will require updated biographies from HPC members. So that might be easy for the new members who might have submitted a CV or a resume. If one hasn't been gotten from you, we will be requesting one of those. Doesn't have to be fancy, but they want to know what you know and why you're here. Historic property activities. I'm not going to holler about the ones that have no updates on them. I am going to pester these folks every couple of months to see how projects are coming. That's, I think, more than we used to do in the past. Things that we did get updates on from Henry Strelo about his 2 certificates of appropriateness. Most of his stuff was stucco related. Weather has kept him down on those. He has not replaced the ramp yet or taken the sidewalls off of the stairs or replaced the stairs yet. Probably the biggest one is the Hotel Royer. They've done some demolition on the membrane roof due to the rain that they've had, and they've replaced the membrane. I have literature and samples coming from Joseph Pryor, the project manager, so that we can keep an eye on the things that they're using. And then finally, the major works for the exterior renovations at the Hotel Royer. They've done some removal and assessment of quite a bit of the half timber trim. They've taken some off and, as I've been told, found that it was deteriorated to the point that it could not be reused. I guess especially...
That was on the old part or the new part?
Both.
Okay.
Both. Now, on the old part, the plan was to repair it and reuse it. And on the new part, it was keeping much of it, but then replacing quite a bit of it. I guess in talking with Anna Margaret Barris from SHPO today, who is the SHPO representative on this project, I explained to her, you know, what was happening. She had mentioned that half timbering mounted directly onto brick is especially susceptible to moisture issues between the wood and the brick. So she wasn't surprised, but she did say that they would require some documentation of that condition. Because both their application to the city, but also the application to the National Park Service had said, we're going to repair and retain the trim on the old section, they would be required to submit an amendment to their work plans to National Park Service and to the city for the certificate of appropriateness that they submitted to us. So it isn't like there isn't going to be paperwork that's going to be done. It would have been nicer, better if it had been done ahead of time, but we've got a lot of time ahead of us to get things straightened out.
Do you know if they kept any samples of what was taken off or
I
trashed?
wandered over and took some pictures, but I didn't pick anything out of the dumpster. I didn't think that was appropriate. I believe their contractor and they are assessing it, so I'm assuming that they've kept samples. I told them that we would like to see some evidence and documentation of this, and what would be best would be to see a chunk of it so you can stick your fingers in it. And so we'll see what we're presented, what you're presented. Again, so I learned quite a bit about the whole process for National Park Service. There is no monitoring. There is no periodic monitoring. SHPO doesn't come up and walk around and take pictures. They don't do a post-assessment visit. They did a pre-project visit and took pictures. They rely on honesty and self-reporting. The application comes in with the proposed work plan and lots of pictures that are keyed to the plans. And then when the project's done, they submit as-built photographs and narrative, similar photograph points so they can compare the two things. So it relies on, honest submission and whatnot. So I anticipate that every week or so I'll be wandering around and taking pictures and trying to keep track of things. But it isn't like there are inspectors there from either the project group, like McCrosty who is their historic advisor on this project. It's, contractors working with the project manager. And in the end, it has to look like what they promised, or else, at least as far as the National Park Service is concerned, what the consequence is whether they get the tax credits or not. They haven't, Anna Margaret said that they haven't had many issues in the past. She mentioned one in the last 10 years at a hotel in Chicago that required some remediation, but that's out of a lot of projects. So that's a pretty good track record. She did say that it is not uncommon for every project to have 3 or 4 amendments. So they already submitted one amendment for the shiplap siding on the Port Cochere and the north entrance. And then this would be amendment number 2, where they might say, boy, this half timbering was all shot, and there's no way that we could repair it. So we're simply going to replace it with new that gets properly sealed and painted, and that would be amendment number 2. So that's what I learned. And any questions about the hotel up to this point? I'll keep you updated every month with a progress report, and if things come up in between, I will email Alice to say, hey, what do we do? Okay, moving on down to zoning issues. No updates or work time spent on Chateau Normand or on the Sutton House and Freeman House. The Ricker House, I did speak with the owner last week. He actually emailed me, and then I called him and I said, we talked about it for half an hour. He is supposed to be submitting a certificate of appropriateness this week. The roof was damaged by hail. I said, not a problem. You just need to submit the paperwork. I will be emailing him tomorrow saying I'm expecting to see a C of A this week. If not, I'll be sending out that zoning violation, which I would have done last week, but he contacted me, so I figured I'd give him a shot. And then on 801 West Oregon Street, thank you, Trent, for speaking with Chris Enck.
I had another exchange with him today.
Okay.
Saying that Chris, the sign's still there, and he said, I'll talk to my local guy again, and if he doesn't get it done, he's coming down next week. And he
Okay.
said, I'll do it.
Okay.
So maybe it'll be it's a minor thing, but maybe we can cross that one off. Yeah.
That would be nice, and I just feel bad keep treating anybody to a different standard than anybody else.
Yeah,
So it's hard for me to get cranky with
Yeah.
Pierre about the posts out in front of Chateau Normand,
We should.
or,
yeah.
frankly, Jonah Weisskopf has some empty signboards out in front of the Sutton and Freeman House back when it was a CPM property. So if I can get some of these others taken care of, we can clean up the others.
Yeah.
That is the end of my staff report. Does anybody have any questions on that? Or comments, concerns? Really feels like things are picking up historic preservation wise. All right, and going back to the study session, I'll introduce Braden. Braden, do you want to present from down there or talk about it from up here, whichever?
That's fine.
Do you? Okay.
So I don't have to turn my head.
Yeah.
Hello. Is that on? Okay. Good evening. As Marcus said, my name is Braden Belcher, and I'm the Community Development Specialist in the Grants Management Division for the City of Urbana. So what I'm here to talk to you tonight about is a programmatic agreement between the City of Urbana, the SHPO office, and the Advisory Council on Historic Preservation, or ACHP. The purpose of this programmatic agreement is to delegate authority for completion of Section 106 reviews to the City of Urbana. And Marcus kind of touched on that a little bit earlier. So the Section 106 of the National Historic Preservation Act, I'm sure some of you might know, it requires that any agency that receives federal funding it says they must assess the effects of its actions on historic buildings. So because the City of Urbana receives funds directly from HUD, whenever the Grants Management Division goes out to do a new project using that HUD funding, we have to complete that Section 106 process. And that involves the SHPO, and so this agreement would allow us to streamline that process by enabling us to do it in-house. So the way this process usually works is, let's say, for example, the Grants Management Division, we have a home repair program. So let's say a resident has their furnace goes out in January, they need an emergency furnace replacement. We would be required to send the scope of work for that project, the address information, to the State Historic Preservation Office, where they would then conduct the Section 106 review. Basically, they're trying to determine two things. First of all, is there a historic property present? If there's not, then we're allowed to proceed with the project. If there is a historic property present, or if the home is in a historic district, then they have to conduct additional review to just make sure that the project is not creating any adverse effects to the building. So because we have to coordinate with the SHPO, that process can take on a good day, it can take 2 weeks. Sometimes it can take about 30 days to receive that clearance back from the SHPO. And as you can imagine, if there's something like an emergency furnace repair, that time restraint can just be challenging. So, as I said, this PA would allow the city staff to conduct that review internally. Again, staff would be determining, again, is there historic property present? If not, then we can proceed. If there is a historic property present, then we have to do the additional review of just making sure there are no adverse effects. So this agreement would go into effect on October 1st, 2021, and it would be good until September 30th, 2026. Now, there are some prerequisite qualifications that the city had to meet in order to qualify for this programmatic agreement, one of which was having qualified personnel on staff. And this is defined, this portion is defined in the Code of Federal Regulation 36 CFR Part 61. And qualified personnel just means someone who has either a higher degree in history, archaeology, architecture, historic preservation, as well as at least two years of experience working in that field. So since the city of Urbana does have qualified personnel on staff, that enables us to have the authority to conduct those reviews internally. So per the federal regulations, the Advisory Council on Historic Preservation was notified of this agreement. We sent them, along with the SHPO, we sent them a draft of this agreement, and they sent us, we sent notice on August 17th, and then they sent their response on August 27th. And their response was that they have decided not to participate in the agreement, and essentially what that means is that they're giving us the go-ahead to proceed. So the SHPO and the city are now at the final stage of finalizing this programmatic agreement. And we can carry it out as written, and you should have received that in your packet. So under this agreement, there are also some activities that are exempt from the Section 106 review. So if there's a project that takes place and the project is taking place on a historic property or in an area of potential effect, there are some projects that are excluded under this agreement. So, for example, minor interior repairs or replacements when there are no structural alterations involved. Painting of exterior components which have previously been painted, repair or replacement of existing utilities such as sewer, water, electrical, gas lines, storm drains, septic tanks, or wells, as well as repair, replacement, removal of non-historic infrastructure such as foundations, sidewalks, curbs, and driveways. And so again, from the grants management perspective, like I was saying, if we have those home repair programs that, plumbing replacements, furnace repairs, minor things like that, we can move forward in a more timely manner under this agreement. So the commission's role going forward will be to have an advisory capacity. So your role will be to answer questions about National Register eligibility of certain properties or resources when those questions arise. And then if there's ever any public objection to work on a historic property, the commission will need to be consulted on those matters as well. So that's a general overview of this programmatic agreement. Like I said, we hope to have it go into effect on October 1st, and it'll be valid until September 30th, 2026. So with that, I'll open it up to any questions that you might have.
Who was it again that initiated this and said this should be a good idea for us to do this?
City staff, the grants management, working with the planning division. The main reason behind pursuing this agreement was, as I mentioned, the grants management division, we do have a lot of those repair programs. Mm-hmm. So we have, a senior repair program, an accessibility program, and then also like an energy efficiency program. And these target low to moderate income residents of Urbana, and we view them as very important to the community. But that SHPO component has always made it just very cumbersome to administer these programs, especially, as I mentioned, when there might be an emergency situation that requires quick action. So it was something that grants management and the planning division had discussed before, but we'd never executed. So back in, I believe, May or June, we contacted the State Historic Preservation Office, and we worked very closely with them in putting this together. And so that's kind of how it started.
Okay. Thank you.
Just curious whether Champaign does something similar, or?
No, they do not have a programmatic agreement. You can actually view, these agreements are all public records, so I believe the Advisory Council on Historic Preservation, their website, you can view them. I think you can also view them on HUD's website. So I only believe a couple communities in Illinois have these.
Okay, so it's not real common.
No, it's not very common. And I think the SHPO was very enthusiastic to work with us because I think it also alleviates some of their work as well. Another thing I wanted to mention is that this agreement will only apply to HUD programs. So any other sort of federal program that through a different department, they would still be bound by that Section 106. So this agreement only will apply to HUD programs. And actually, in Appendix A, there's a list of the specific HUD grant programs that are covered under this agreement. So if there's any sort of federal spending outside of those programs specifically, they would still have to go through the process to consult with the SHPO.
I had been wondering the same thing, if this is really pioneering something or if there are other communities that had done it. So you've answered the question that was in my mind. And we had been looking earlier at the steps that would be required for somebody to become qualified to do this work, because of course that's really important. So I don't know if anybody else had questions about the training. It looked fairly comprehensive.
Yeah, I mean, that's the whole part of this is, we have this great staff that's supported historic preservation, and that's created a track record for the city of Urbana, and otherwise we wouldn't qualify for it at all.
And to that point, if at any time during this, from October 1st until September 30th, 2026, if the city does not maintain someone on staff with those qualifications, we would have to notify the commission and then the SHPO, because that will affect the agreement. So it can only be valid as long as you have a qualified person on staff. So that's just another way the commission can be involved in the future is, to notify you if there's that staff turnover.
I'm trusting that would then not be the case. We're not at risk of that. I mean, and there are people who would be qualified to do this. So just one other question. I mean, as somebody who is an administrator within a very large bureaucracy, I know intimately how much we've benefited from these kinds of efficiencies, finding things and streamlining processes. And so it does, of course, shift a burden from one person to another, usually. And so is there any concern within the agency about taking on this kind of work, in conjunction with all the other things you're doing? Because I'm assuming you're overloaded.
That's a great question. So I'm actually the one who completes those environmental reviews. So, for example, when we have a HUD project, I have to, HUD has the form that has to, got to check all the boxes. And this programmatic agreement will actually take a lot of work off my plate because, as I mentioned, there are those exempt projects that are under this agreement don't have to have that review process anymore. And those are probably 95% of what we actually do in grants management, those sort of more minor repair programs. So by just being able to click a box and say, oh, there's a programmatic agreement that covers these, that cuts down on many hours of work. So again, it does streamline that process, and then I don't necessarily have to, go back and forth with the SHPO, send them things back and forth. So it does shift some responsibilities for sure, but at the same time, I think for 95% of the projects that we undertake, it'll simplify it greatly.
And it sounds like even for those 5%, it can make it even easier. I mean, I know like if you're trying to amend a website, it's easier to do it yourself if you know how to do it than it is to explain to somebody else what
Right.
needs to be done for them to do it.
Absolutely.
So, yeah, okay, thank you.
But I also think that between grants management and the planning division, we have a good, collaborative team. So even for those projects that require more review, I think it'll allow us to work together a little bit more, and also I think we'll just be able to solve those problems a little bit faster.
And just from the continuity aspect, I think one of the reasons that planning didn't think about doing this earlier was we don't have the qualified personnel in the way SHPO needs them, as far as like history degrees or the architecture degrees. We mostly have planning degrees. So it might be that future employees, a preference might be expressed to have, if you have a historic preservation background or an architecture background, so that we can at least have 2 or 3 people that might in the future be able to be qualified personnel to either take over or to share the load, so that it wouldn't all be on one person's. Now, the agreement does allow staff who are not qualified to work under a qualified person. So if all of a sudden a bunch of projects come in and Braden needs a hand, we can help him with that, but he would be in charge.
It underscores yet again, the virtues of having a master's degree in history.
Yes,
Right?
yes.
So your
That's
master's
what I
degrees at
said,
work.
yeah.
So there you are.
Duly note that, Kat.
Any other questions? Marcus, what do you want from us? You wanted a resolution or something, I think?
So I think in our late discussions today, this is kind of a procedural thing that the mayor would sign off on without even needing to go to city council for an ordinance or resolution or anything. But it would be nice to maybe take a straw poll of the members present saying, you know, all those who think that this would be beneficial versus all those who think that this is not a good idea, and just so that something like that can be in the record. Does that sound okay?
Yeah,
Informal?
absolutely.
Okay,
Yeah.
so we're gonna say no vote required, but straw poll, we'll just take a voice vote, all in favor that think that having a programmatic agreement to handle things internally, review-wise for Section 106 required projects, think it's beneficial, please signify by saying aye.
Hi.
Aye.
All opposed? Unanimous? Okay, thank you very much for your time on that, and thank you, Braden.
Excellent.
Yeah,
Thanks.
good presentation.
And just staff-wise from planning, I want to express that the planning division was very happy that grants management took this up and that they are doing the lion's share of the work and will be keeping both planning and the HPC apprised of anything that comes up. Thank you.
Next, we have announcements, and I wanted to make an announcement for anyone interested in the fabulous work of our newest commission member, Parkland Gallery. If you haven't been there, it's really a wonderful place to go. And this is Thursday reception on September 2nd, but the exhibit itself is open until Saturday, October 16th. That's all I had.
Okay, so now we have, since we are done a lot earlier than last month, last item, next to the last item on the agenda is going into closed session to consider security procedures. So because there's nobody here from the public, we do not need to sequester ourselves in a different room. I think I need a motion and a second to move into closed session, and then video will get shut down and audio should keep running or run on a different file, and we'll watch this video, and then we need to move to come back out of closed session and back into open session with a second and vote, and then we adjourn. Does that make
I'd like
sense?
to move that we go into closed session.
It's been moved by Trent and seconded by Laura O'Donnell. Are there any other questions, concerns? We don't need
I don't know. I've never gone into closed session before.
It's the larval stage.
Oh, is it voice
I'm in
vote?
favor of it. Let's do it.
Okay, so let's take a voice vote about going into closed
Okay,
session.
all those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Passes unanimously. We now need to move into closed session.
Okay.